The Office of the Registrar General, in collaboration with Land Services SA, welcomes you to today's presentation on the role and responsibilities of the Certifier. This is a pre-recorded session with a live Q&A session at the end of this presentation. We ask you to kindly hold all questions until the allocated time where one of our subject matter experts will be able to assist.
Office of the Registrar General and Land Services SA acknowledge First Nations people as the traditional owners of South Australian land and waters, and we extend our respect to elders past, present and emerging. We value and recognise the ongoing cultural and heritage beliefs and relationship First Nations peoples have with these lands and waters, and the continuing importance of this today. As organisations that work across national and international boundaries, we also wish to pay our respects to First Nations peoples throughout Australia and across the world.
Your presenters today are Tracy Nelson from the Office of the Registrar General and Natasha Stupel from Land Services SA. Tracy Nelson is the e-conveyancing specialist from the Office of the Registrar General in South Australia. Tracy had 19 years of practical experience as a conveyancer before joining the Office of the Registrar General in February 2023. Tracy brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to her role, including strong relationships with industry and stakeholders. Tracy is passionate about her role as e-conveyancing specialist and assisting industry in the challenges that they face today.
And Natasha Stupel, the Registration, Training, Audit and Workflow Officer for Land Services SA. Natasha has over 35 years experience in land titling and deals with our more complex non-division dealings. She has worked on a number of flagship projects such as SALIS, e-conveyancing and residual dealings, and has been promoted into a new position of Registration, Training, Audit and Workflow Officer within Land Services SA to recognise and utilise her subject matter expertise and experience. Today we will be discussing the role of the certifier. We will cover the 4 certification statements, the requirement for the certifier to have personal knowledge, the responsibility of the certifier, and lastly, the repercussions and penalties for incorrect certification.
Section 2731 of the Real Property Act 1886 clearly states that the certifier, being the registered conveyancer, solicitor or other prescribed person, is taking responsibility that the requirements for all certification statements have been met. The legal onus is on the certifier and does not extend to the file manager, the person entering data into the ELNO workspace or other office employees. Take a minute to read and take in the 4 statements on the screen. Consider whether you, the actual certifier, always meet the standards for each statement. This applies equally to electronic and paper dealings. This is reinforced by the Registrar General's South Australian Participation Rules for Electronic Conveyancing and ARNIC Model Participation Rules. This webinar is a timely reminder to all certifiers of the obligations and responsibilities created when applying their name to the certification. It's not my file, I just certified it. Have you heard this statement in your own office, during a discussion with another legal or conveyancing firm? Or have you said it yourself? Registration officers are hearing this far too often when contacting a conveyancer or solicitor regarding a dealing inquiry. This is not only disturbing to hear, but a concerning trend within the industry. When a registration officer has an inquiry that can be dealt with over the phone, they will request to speak to the responsible certifier, as they are legally responsible for the correctness of the dealing and the documentation that stands behind the certifications. Section 273 1A of the Real Property Act states, certification under subsection 1 may only be provided by a natural person who has personal knowledge as to the matters to which he or she is certifying. For every document, that you are certifying, you should consider whether you have personal knowledge of the following. Verification of identity. Prior to certifying, you should consider who conducted the verification of identity. Was it conducted by you, the actual certifier, or by another person in your office? Have you checked and reviewed the identity documents? Are you, the certifier, satisfied that reasonable steps have been taken to verify your client's identity? As regards client authorization, do you hold a properly completed client authorization for the party that you are representing and certifying on behalf of? Has it been signed by the required persons? If signed by an attorney, has the power of attorney been deposited? Before certifying, have you viewed the client authorization, particularly if you were not present at the signing of the form? If you are representing a deceased party, should the applicants be the executors or administrators? Unless a client authorization for the particular transaction was signed prior to their decease, a deceased person cannot be named as a party to a dealing. In relation to retention of evidence, consider: have you cited the evidence? Is the evidence adequate for the dealing that you are certifying? Are you ensuring that the evidence is retained and is being securely stored for the appropriate amount of time? Has adequate verification of authority, right to deal, been obtained? Do you have personal knowledge of this? As regards the certifier has taken reasonable steps to ensure that the registry instrument or document is correct and compliant with relevant legislation and any prescribed requirement? Do you have personal knowledge that the instrument or document is correct and compliant with relevant legislation and prescribed requirements? Have you reviewed the completed paper or electronic dealing? Is the information in the paper or rendered electronic form accurate? And does it align with your verification of identity, client authorization, evidence, and verification of authority? Have you complied with current ORG participation rules and ARNIC model participation rules? Before certifying, all of these points should be considered.
Section 232 of the Real Property Act 1886 relates to certifying incorrect documents. If a person falsely provides a certification under Section 2731, the person is guilty of an offence. The maximum penalty is $5,000 or imprisonment for 1 year. If a person falsely provides a certification under Section 2731 and the person knows that the certification is false, the person is guilty of an offence and the maximum penalty is $10,000 or imprisonment for 2 years. Section 232A of the Real Property Act 1886 relates to offences relating to verification of identity. If a person falsely states that another person's identity has been verified in compliance with the verification of identity requirements or the participation rules, the person is guilty of an offence. The maximum penalty is $5,000 or imprisonment for 1 year. If a person falsely states that another person's identity has been verified in compliance with the VOI requirements or the participation rules, and the person knows that the statement is false, the person is guilty of an offence and the maximum penalty is $10,000 or imprisonment for 2 years. If a person makes a false or misleading statement in connection with the VOI of a person or another person for the purposes of the VOI requirements or the participation rules, the person is guilty of an offence. The maximum penalty is $5,000 or imprisonment for 1 year. If a person falsely states that another person's identity has been verified in compliance with the VOI requirements or the participation rules, and the person knows that the statement is false, the person is guilty of an offence and the maximum penalty is $10,000 or imprisonment for 2 years. A person who, in connection with the VOI of the person or another person for the purposes of the VOI requirements or the participation rules produces a document or record that he or she knows or ought to know is false or misleading in a material particular is guilty of an offence. The maximum penalty is $10,000 or imprisonment for 2 years. Section 232B of the Real Property Act 1886 relates to offences relating to verification of authority. If a person falsely states that the authority of another person to enter into a transaction or to execute an instrument or document in connection with a transaction has been verified in accordance with the verification of authority guidelines or the participation rules, the person is guilty of an offence. The maximum penalty is $5,000 or imprisonment for 1 year. If a person falsely states that the authority of another person to enter into a transaction or to execute an instrument or document in connection with a transaction has been verified in accordance with the verification of authority guidelines or the participation rules and the person knows the statement is false, the person is guilty of an offence. The maximum penalty is $10,000 or imprisonment for 2 years. Section 233 of the Real Property Act 1886 relates to other offences. A person who willfully and fraudulently makes any false statement in any application to bring land under the provisions of this Act or in any application to be registered as proprietor, whether in possession, reversion, remainder, or otherwise on a transmission, or in any other application to be registered under this Act as proprietor of any land or any estate or interest in land, withholds or conceals or assists or joins in or is privy to the suppressing, withholding or concealing from the Registrar General or any Deputy Registrar General any material document, fact or matter of information, gives false evidence or makes a false statement in his or her examination before the Registrar General or any Deputy Registrar General is guilty of an offence, and the maximum penalty is $50,000 or imprisonment for 10 years. Making false certifications is outside of the law and is taken very seriously by the Office of the Registrar General. In addition to the legislated penalties and possible court action, alternative actions that may be taken by the Registrar General for false certifications include disciplinary discussions and actions and suspension from ELNO platforms. Concerns regarding false or incorrect certifications can be brought to the attention of the Registrar General in several ways. It may be because of a compliance audit conducted by Land Services SA, an anomaly identified by Land Services SA, or a concern raised by an industry member or private person. Once notified, the Registrar General will investigate the matter and, where necessary, take appropriate action. Although the results of these investigations are not made public, the Registrar General has held disciplinary meetings with some industry members, and in appropriate circumstances, further action and penalties were imposed on the certifiers and the company by which they were employed. A claim against the conveyancer can also impact on your professional indemnity insurance and potentially increase your premium and excess for a policyholder. If the Registrar General deems your offence a risk to the integrity of the register, then the Registrar General can submit a case to Consumer and Business Services to have your licence suspended while court actions are taken against you. In making a false statement, no matter how minor, it can do damage to your reputation as a registered conveyancer or legal practitioner by souring the relationship with other parties involved in the transaction. When you make a false statement, it is not only you that can be impacted by it. This can reflect poorly on the company you work for or your own business, which can result in bad reviews being left online, loss of business, and loss of credibility.
Land Services SA's website has a range of educational and support materials to assist you in your day-to-day work. Our Industry Education Hub is a good place to start. This can be found by clicking Industry Education Hub on the homepage of Land Services SA's website. A copy of today's webinar will be published on the Industry Education Hub together with recording of previously held webinars. That concludes the recorded webinar section. Thank you for listening. Please remain online for the live Q&A session with our subject matter experts.